Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? Hey, remember when I used to cover X-Men comics? I used to do a lot of those. It's been a little while. Last one I did was Uncanny X-Men number 252, and that was a couple of months ago. That was back at the end of September. A couple things have happened with the channel since then, and with the Blood Force comic that I've been doing, but now we're getting back on track, and it's just in time for kind of a sea change in the Uncanny X-Men title. We're looking at Uncanny X-Men number 256 today. You'll notice I skipped a couple in the middle there. This is a weird time for the X-Men, where it feels like whatever plan Chris Claremont may have once had for the X-Men, like it feels like he lost track of it a long-ass time ago. So Claremont's been toying around with the lineup ever since, well, I mean, he's been kind of doing it slowly ever since the end of the Dark Phoenix saga, really. But for the last few years, he kind of had his lineup set with, a mix that I don't know if everybody loved. It's not exactly the most classic mix. I mean, you got Rogue and Storm and Colossus and Wolverine. Everybody recognizes those guys as part of the classic lineup. And then you had characters like Psylocke and Dazzler and Longshot and Havoc. And it's like, okay, well, those feel more like fill-in X-Men a little bit. Guys, we're going to try and see if we can get the readers to get behind in the meantime while we kind of sort things out. Because Claremont was kind of the opinion that this was something he could do, where he could constantly cycle characters in and out of the X-Men lineup. And if he featured characters in the right story, then they would become fan favorites, and that would just become a new version of the lineup that everybody recognized and enjoyed. And it's good in theory, but it feels like something hasn't been taking, and Claremont has been trying to do some alchemy shit and try to speed things up to get to some kind of culmination. I don't know. It feels as though, Claremont has just been messing around for quite a while now. Really ever since the X-Men supposedly died back in Uncanny number 227, I think it was. That would have been more than 2 years before this. From there, we've had the entire Outback era. There was the introduction of the Genosha storyline in an attempt to make a new villain that I don't know if it completely took, but I don't think it's left Chris Claremont's mind at this point. There was the introduction of the Reavers as new villains. And he seems sure at this time that these are going to be like the Marauders. Like, everybody's going to hate the Reavers. I don't think anybody really cares too much about the Reavers. So now at this point, we're at the point where there really isn't a team. Because in that issue where Claremont supposedly killed off the X-Men, he also introduced this device called the Siege Perilous, which was kind of the Deus Ex Machina machine. And in the last couple of issues, he basically threw all of his characters into the Siege Perilous, minus a few. Longshot just kind of left because nobody likes Longshot.
What would you say you do here?
Storm, he killed off, kind of, and we're just kind of waiting for her to come back. And Wolverine was the only one left, along with a New Mutant character named Jubilee that is going to get, a higher profile pretty soon. Everybody else, Rogue, Colossus, Havoc, Dazzler, Psylocke, all went into the Siege Perilous. And when you do that, what happens is Claremont basically gets a character reset button and figure out some new kind of circumstances for you. Because, I don't know, the old circumstances were getting like old and stale or something. I don't know why he felt the need to do that. X-Men is, I think, still the most popular title at Marvel, reflected in the fact that we're still in bi-weeklies, which means Marvel is pumping out Uncanny X-Men issues twice a month, because that's what people want to buy. So, let's make them buy it twice as often. Meanwhile, the comic itself, it feels like nobody knows what's happening, including Claremont. So in the intervening issues, I'm kind of realizing this is a long lead-up, so I apologize for that. But I feel like we do have to cover at least a little bit of ground. I went over these beforehand to see if I should be covering these instead, and I don't really think that's the case. Issue 253, not a whole lot really happens. This is a weird tweener issue where we're just kind of resetting the stage. The only things we're really establishing is that Storm seems to be back from the dead, only as a preteen for some reason, because I guess Claremont decided the X-Men needed that, even though he kind of has Jubilee, who's pretty much in that Shadow Cat kind of role. Not a whole lot else happens in this issue. We kind of established that Magneto he's cutting ties with the X-Men again, which is probably for the best because I forgot Magneto was affiliated. We seem to be trying to focus a little bit on Banshee and whoever is left on Muir Island, which isn't a whole lot of guys. The X-Men have all disappeared. X-Factor has also disappeared. The New Mutants are off in Asgard, for fuck's sake. So what we're left with is, Banshee and Moira McTaggart and Sunder and Legion. And then we're going to throw Polaris into the mix, along with Nightcrawler's witchy ex-girlfriend. And it's like the weirdest kind of motley crew you've ever seen. It's not even like replacement X-Men. It's the replacements for the replacement X-Men. So they get their own kind of giant-size X-Men #1 cover. That is a weird mix with Forge thrown in there for good measure. And the Reavers target them because they lose track of Wolverine when he escapes from their clutches. And they decide that the most likely place that he might end up is on Muir Island. So they're just going to target anybody X-related on Muir Island. And there's a fight between them. Destiny is apparently killed. Somehow I don't think that would take too well. And that's kind of it. There's the whole bit with Polaris where she gets super strength and super durability instead of magnetism powers. I mean, she kind of had that from back in X-Men #250, but we haven't seen her since then. And that's kind of it. It doesn't seem to have any kind of bearing on the rest of the story. It's just, here's some X characters in a fight with the Reavers because we want to keep the Reavers kind of relevant. So now we're getting to issue 256, and this is essentially a reset. The only main character, I'd say, who hasn't been thrown in the Siege Perilous, he hasn't had his backstory or his current circumstances twisted, is Wolverine. And he's somewhere out there still recuperating. So now in this one, we're going to focus on Psylocke. And in addition to just, regular weird X-Men circumstances, this is also the beginning of the Acts of Vengeance crossover, in which Marvel villains match up against weird adversaries. So instead of getting the Mandarin versus Iron Man, Mandarin's going to show up in X-Men for some reason. I've covered one of those before in New Mutants when the Vulture showed up again, and it didn't seem particularly appropriate. But that's an intriguing idea for a crossover, theoretically. I don't know that it was particularly memorable or if it had any particularly memorable moments. But one thing it did do was it gave Mark Silvestri a couple of months off while they found a fill-in artist. And the guy they found this time was Jim Lee, and this is kind of the primer for his run on X-Men. So I guess we could start with the cover on this. This is kind of a typical Jim Lee cover in that, it kind of reminds me of the cover to X-Men #6, in that it's a couple of villains standing there. Now, it is drawn very cool, particularly for the time, when we wouldn't be used to Jim Lee's style. At this time, he's been building up his name over on Punisher War Journal. And he's getting some traction, but I don't think he's really a household name at this point. I believe this would probably be the sequence of issues that kind of put him over the top on that. But, it's a cool shot of Psylocke here. We can assume it's Psylocke. Again, obviously we know it's Psylocke, but at the time, I wonder if there was any confusion at all. Probably not, because they mention her on the cover here. That's kind of Psylocke's costume. Doesn't entirely look like her face, but that's okay. And the Mandarin is just kind of giddy behind her. Good pose. We'd see this pose over and over and over again from Jim Lee in the following years. But at this time, it's still pretty fresh. Get the nice dynamic cape stuff going on. Get a complete lack of background. And this is the classic version of Jim Lee, where it's him inked by Scott Williams. I'm not sure if this has happened before this. It would have had to have happened on Punisher War Journal, I think, if it had. Because Scott Williams didn't show up in Uncanny #248, which was the only other issue of Uncanny that Jim Lee had drawn before this. So I didn't read this comic when it came out. I started reading Uncanny X-Men comics, buying them regularly, at the end of Jim Lee's run. So I try to imagine what it would have been like at the time for this issue to come out, and I think it would have been it might have felt like a huge shift in styles. You go from Silvestri, who's very flowing at this time because he's having to go very fast, and him and Dan Green have worked out this very kind of gestural, expressionistic kind of style, where they don't go heavy on splash pages, they don't go heavy on weird page or panel design. They focus on good storytelling, but the figures are usually very dynamic, and it can get pretty quick with the brushwork sometimes. This is going to feel completely different because I think Jim Lee is realizing that people dig the splash pages, and that's going to get him more work. There's less focus on dynamicism, more focus on cool shots, and more focus on detail. So, for instance, we're going to start things out with an establishing scene in Hong Kong on the peak overlooking the harbor is where the taipans live, the captains of industry, the master traders, the lords of this mercantile city. Men of such wealth and power, they believe they have nothing to fear. And, of course, we're going to show just all sorts of dead bodies all over this courtyard here, people hanging from the tree branch. And this is somebody's guards who have all been slaughtered on the way in. And yeah, that attention to detail, it's kind of all over the background here, which, I mean, has always kind of been a bit of a Jim Lee calling card. You know, like he'll avoid backgrounds sometimes, maybe when he's trying to make up a little bit of time, or, you know, like there's some panels where it just isn't necessary for a cool image. But usually he's pretty diligent about dropping in some backgrounds and making them fairly detailed. So we're starting things out with Matsuo, and he's broken into the house of the Mandarin. So that would be the person who all these guards belong to, who have all been assassinated as Matsuo made his way in. So Matsuo is offering his services to the Mandarin and services of the Hand, which is the ninja organization that Frank Miller popularized. Mandarin says, "What do I need you for?" Matsuo says, "'Cause," and Mandarin goes, "Okay." But, you know, hey, you know, there's a big old splash page here. I don't know if this is quite the cool shot that Jim Lee would have had in mind, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. At this time, Jim Lee has solidified his style to a very nice point. Chronologically, the last comic of his that I would have looked at would be Punisher War Journal number 6. And his style was still a little bit loosey-goosey. He quite nailed everything down just yet. Here, he's firmed it up a fair bit. And there is some neat stuff going on, like the color holds for the city backgrounds here that you know Jim Lee drew anyway. I am noticing a fair amount of focus on shadow that I don't think Mark Silvestri always does, particularly when he's having to do the bi-weekly issues. But we are focusing on making sure that there's a lot of lines on the page. And yeah, he likes doing this stuff here, too, with the ceilings, with all the filigree. That would kind of get him into some trouble, I think, during the Extinction Agenda. Still trying to convince Mandarin here to take on Matsuo and the Hand as his lackeys. Mandarin, at this point, still saying, "Nah, that's okay." Matsuo's like, "Oh, by the way, I think it's funny that Iron Man keeps beating the shit out of you. You know what? If you hire me as your lackey, I can tell you what you should do to try and save a little bit of face. What you should do is attack someone else completely different." Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but like not a lot about this crossover makes a whole lot of sense anyway. This is convincing enough for the Mandarin that he decides that, okay, Matsuo, you can work for me for the next 3 issues. Again, you know, we're focusing on getting large shots of the characters when we can. The rest of the time, it's kind of unimaginative, but this is a talking head sequence. There's not a whole lot you can do to make it particularly exciting. So on these shots, yeah, Jim Lee is going to focus on getting a whole lot of shadows in on the Mandarin. He wants to make sure he's heavily shadowed at least for this sequence, and getting a whole bunch of background detailing. Like, look at all the shit he's putting in on this desk. I don't know that Jim Lee does this 5 years from now. All right, so from here, we're going to focus on Psylocke, and we're kind of going to focus on Psylocke for the rest of the issue. Psylocke, you'll remember, has gone through the Siege Perilous. We haven't seen her since. And this is going to be a weird kind of, like, almost dream sequence that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We get Betsy as a kid. She's at, like, a Royal Air Force museum with her brother, Brian, who would eventually become Captain Britain. And she's playing around in like a model Spitfire, but then it turns into she's in an actual Spitfire in World War II, and she's flying towards this giant person. One thing I am noticing here is that Michael Golden influence. I remember hearing that all those guys at this time were big into Michael Golden, which makes sense. I mean, Michael Golden's friggin' awesome, and he loves to put a bunch of noodly detail on the page. But you can see it a little bit in these faces here, particularly like stuff like this. All right, then she's back to being a kid again. She's walking away from the museum with Brian. And yeah, the blonde woman here, I don't know who this blonde woman's supposed to be. Maybe it doesn't matter. Who knows? But she's got a ring, and she's like, "Hey, you dropped your ring." And Betsy's like, "I don't have a ring." It's like, "Well, you do now. Put the ring on." And this is going to tie into the Mandarin, because the whole thing with the Mandarin is he has the ring, the 10 rings of power. So Betsy and Brian keep walking. They get into little squabbles because they're, you know, like preteen kids. Then all of a sudden, it becomes like Mike Grell's Warlord for a second. And they're, like full on Dark Ages muscle people who are going at it with real ass swords for a second. And then it stops and they're like, what the hell just happened? And the reader's like, I don't know, man. You tell me. You're the one doing the story. But Betsy apologizes for roughhousing, and Brian's like, hey, that's okay. Hey, I found you another ring. So she's got to put on the other ring. And this is going to be this whole thing. And the idea is that by the end of this weird dream sequence comic, she'll have collected all 10 rings, and that will have like eliminated her old personality and put her fully in sway to the Mandarin. It's not super well explained. It doesn't feel like a fully formed concept. It feels like a neat idea that if explained properly and fleshed out properly, could make for a weird kind of surreal issue. And, it's obviously what they're going for in this, and it doesn't feel like it gets accomplished very well. I think part of that's probably down to this being a Jim Lee issue. I mean, for one thing, Jim Lee isn't used to working with Chris Claremont. For another thing, Jim Lee doesn't do, like, surreal, metaphoric type shit. At this time he's new, so people don't really know that, I guess. But, no, you don't get Jim Lee for that. You can get Mark Silvestri, he'll do it. I don't know if he'll fully understand what he's drawing, but he'll fucking do it and he'll make it look great. Jim Lee draws things in a kind of realistic style. Sometimes from interesting angles, usually not, unless there's an action sequence. And everything's in proportion, everything works, the shadow's usually fairly realistic. And that's kind of his deal right now. I don't even know what this page is about. Some guy named Jamie pulls up in a Ferrari with his girl. Betsy jumps in his lap. Jamie's girl is being all condescending to her, and Betsy grabs a steering wheel. Jamie hits the accelerator, and they gun it down the road. So that showed her. Again, kind of that Michael Golden face in here. And yeah, they keep doing that. I don't know what this is accomplishing. This is not happening in real life. And I don't think that this is doing anything in terms of accomplishing the goal of getting rings on Betsy's fingers. Which, again, gets her in service to the Mandarin, theoretically. But we get these cool shots of a Ferrari kind of zipping around in kind of like manga-influenced panels. Like, these are fun stuff. With a lot of interesting effects here. Trying to get kind of a blur effect, trying to get sort of a shutter effect with the car swerving in like a handbrake turn. I feel like this is the kind of thing that Jim Lee's probably reading, in manga at the time. And then because this is a dream sequence, we have to have weird shit happen for no apparent reason. So she pulls up to her destination, and now she's a hot lady in a slinky outfit. And instead of that Jamie guy, it's Cypher from the New Mutants. And she's breaking up with him. And she's wandering into this kind of weird-looking castle thing that appears to be run by Mojo dressed up as a bellhop. And again, like, who the hell knows even what's happening? But hey, we got a cool shot of Psylocke being all like super sexy and shit, right? I mean, I guess it's, I don't know when the hell she would have had blonde hair. Doesn't matter though. Big panel with the slinky pose. That's what matters. Interestingly, Jim Lee's still figuring out how to draw boobs. These are fine, but this is not definitive Jim Lee boob territory. I feel like he'd become kind of an authority in that fairly soon. So anyway, she gets inside this castle thing. Inside is Storm, and it's adult Storm. And again, if we've been reading along at this time, this might be confusing because, okay, it looks like they're trying to work Storm back into the story, but she's a child, but oh no. But then again, dream sequence, so never mind, doesn't matter. Lots of little kind of Art Adams detail in these backgrounds, man. These are some involved pages. They start walking through like the foyer. Storm's outfit keeps changing. I didn't quite notice that at first, but again, just kind of, I suppose, heightening the dreamlike feeling in this. I imagine that's the point. And Betsy gets shuffled off by Mojo, bellhop Mojo, and blonde chick who was in this thing earlier. And they're going to give her a makeover because Storm keeps getting makeovers. I guess that's the point there. And when they give Betsy a makeover, she comes out Asian. For some reason, it's not explained. She's just Asian now. Okay. See? New Asian Psylocke. And it feels like Claremont's trying to give her some kind of depth. It feels like Claremont's been trying to give her some depth since she was first introduced, and he's never quite managed it. She gets into a fight with Storm here, where she's like, why was Brian chosen to become Captain Britain and not me? He never wanted that kind of life. It was all I ever dreamed of. I'd have given anything for the chance. And Storm says, "What is wrong, Elizabeth? You look so strange." I guess, kind of one of the few references at this time that, why are you Asian? And Psylocke says, "I don't know. I feel, no, that's just it. I can't feel, inside or out. It's like I'm screaming without making a sound. I touch, but there's no sensation. I'm solid, yet I don't exist. Alive, a ghost. Witch. Someone's out there, Aurora, in the dark, watching." Does that mean anything? Any of that? And that's been this whole sequence, is just people saying things that sound dramatic or sound like something from a dream sequence, and none of it feels like it's tying together. It's just like they're trying to do a thing where Psylocke doesn't have an identity, like literally, because she just walked out of the Siege Perilous, and she's kind of like piecing her personality together or something. Again, Siege Perilous is something that was never really properly explained. But this whole thing has just been confusing. The art's pretty good. It's not quite primetime Jim Lee, but it's getting there pretty quick. But the story itself is a fucking mess. We're going to cut to the Mandarin and Matsuo, who have captured Psylocke. They've got her in some kind of virtual reality kind of thing, and they're running her through some kind of program where, they're trying to kind of transform her while she's in this malleable state. Figuring, boy, it'd be cool if we had a telepath. And that's kind of it. You got ninjas now. What if you had ninjas and a telepath? Wouldn't that be sick? That'd be so sick, man. So that's this page here. Again, Matsuo kind of talking the Mandarin into taking part in this crossover. The Mandarin being kind of hesitant and just like, I don't think I belong in this crossover, really. It's like, nobody belongs in this crossover. That's the point of the crossover. You think Spider-Man fighting the Red Skull made any kind of sense? Shit, no, but that shit happened. Again, we're focusing heavily on the shadows, a bit more so than Jim Lee would later on. By later on, I mean post the Wildcats miniseries at Image, where he'd kind of ease off a little bit. But that was, the kind of part of the foundation for building the Jim Lee brand, I think. All right, so now we're getting to the point where we're trying to break Psylocke down so that she accepts the rings and kind of accepts fealty to the Mandarin and becomes Lady Mandarin or some shit. So she's going to do that by severing her ties with her previous ex-buddies. First, she has to subjugate Storm, and Storm has to give up her ring. She has a ring. Everybody has a ring. And if they give Psylocke the ring, then Psylocke gets a ring, and eventually she'll have 10 rings, and that'll mean fucking something. Cool shot of her blasting Storm, though. Don't know what power this is supposed to be. But again, it's dream sequence, so doesn't really matter, I guess. Nothing matters in this. It's okay. I suppose another part of this is to showcase that, Psylocke could be a threat if we ever felt like writing her like that. We just don't ever feel like writing her like that. So next one she goes and visits is Colossus. And this feels like a very Art Adams influenced Colossus, particularly in shots like this, just the proportions and the level of detail on the character. Art Adams would be a very obvious influence on Jim Lee, but I feel like he hasn't fully got his hooks in him just yet. But it is definitely starting. But, cool shot with Psylocke and her ass right in front of Colossus here. That's a great looking panel. This is one of these anchor images. We're getting a few throughout the comic. And she starts using her Mandarin rings to incapacitate the X-Men. So, for instance, she's going to freeze Colossus. So since he's metal, he just kind of shatters. And she gets another ring. God knows where he was keeping that. It wouldn't have fit on his fingers. I think I have a guess. No, I don't. No, I don't. Next, she's going to take out Dazzler. She hits her with lightning. Why not, I suppose. Not the coolest shots for Dazzler, but, again, we're being pretty diligent about the level of detail in this. It's interesting. Last time we saw Jim Lee, I feel like, in Uncanny X-Men number 248, I feel like it felt kind of like elevated house style stuff, where he was just extremely solid, didn't go for very many cool shots, but now he's figured something out. So anyway, now we've moved on to Havoc. It feels like we're doing a little bit of foreshadowing with the X-Men here. Not so much with Storm, but with Colossus, we get Betsy doing commentary. So she's like, Colossus painting in New York's Soho art colony. and I believe that would come up pretty shortly. Dazzler working at a Hollywood dance club. I'm not for sure on that, but that would make sense. Havoc running from the Genosians. That would come up, although not for quite a while. And she zaps him with one of the rings. Then she stops across Rogue. Rogue, of course, hasn't been seen since like issue 247, I think. But here, she's in like the aftermath of a battle between her and Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel. That's coming up in like Uncanny 273, I think. Again, we're like a year and a half away from that. So at this point, she's got 8 rings. Then she gets blasted by somebody called Slaymaster. I don't know who this is. Seems to have been a Captain Britain villain who last time he showed up fought Betsy in her brief iteration as Captain Britain. Okay, so that makes some sense. And he was supposed to be killed off at that time. And he kind of beats her around a little bit. That's a bit of a goofy looking character, but, well, you know, I think he was a Marvel UK character in the 70s. Like, it could have gotten worse. I guess this is her eyes getting, like, clawed out. And Slaymaster gets her right where he wants her, but then she starts doing ninja shit because she's in a ninja outfit. That just happens. Everybody should have a ninja outfit so that they can do ninja shit. So she starts taking it back to Slaymaster, even though she has no eyes. But, you know, she's telepathic, so that works out fine. Even though this is a dream sequence, so what's the difference? And gets him down on the ground, where he turns into the Mandarin. So this is like the culmination of the dream sequence. And he's going to use the rings to bend her to his will. And she goes, no, your mind may control the ring, but basically I control your mind as a telepath. So she gets him to, I guess, kind of zap himself with his rings. So she collects them all. She gets brand new mojo eyes. And then somehow out of all of that, she ends up kneeling before the Mandarin, presenting him with his rings that he had previously, that she collected in her dream. And now somehow this means that Psylocke, by negating Mandarin's control of her, is now accepting Mandarin's control of her. And yeah, like, I don't know what the fuck is going on here. Doesn't make any sense. Oh, hey, look, the comic's over. That's Uncanny X-Men number 256. So yeah, I mean, like, if you're reading this comic at the time when it's coming out, I can't imagine what you're thinking. Because we've just had 3 issues with barely X-Men fighting against new enemies that, you know, haven't 100% taken. And we're also throwing in Freedom Force in the mix, so that'll help somehow. And then we get this issue where we're trying to, like, explain what happened to Psylocke, and good fucking luck, buddy. You know, at least from here, I think it's pretty straightforward. Psylocke is, for some reason, Asian, and she's in the thrall of the Mandarin against Wolverine. That seems to be about the gist of it. So, like, it's a good thing, I guess, that the art got really interesting in this one. You know, for the most part, I feel like Chris Claremont didn't really give him the best stuff to draw exactly. Like, not like he would when his main run gets underway. You know, you think about when the Jim Lee run really kicks into gear in Uncanny 268, which is the one with Captain America, and we're starting every issue with splash, double splash. We get that iconic Jim Lee shot of Captain America flying towards us, where it feels like Jim Lee has a whole lot more influence on what goes down on the page. That's kind of a different time. At this point, Claremont still, I think, runs this thing with an iron fist. And while he's willing to let the new kid, you know, draw some fun stuff here and there, you know, he's still making sure, okay, but the main part is the story. Everything else is if we can fit it in. The only problem is that the story's fucking nonsense. You know, it's funny because I'd see this cover and it seemed like, you know, oh man, this is some classic Uncanny stuff where iconic events happened. And it's like, I don't really think they did. But hey, like I said, we're going to be on more even footing at least on the next issue. And we'll get, you know, a whole lot more cool Jim Lee shots. So that'll be cool. Like, we're building up to the Jim Lee that I like. Like I said, he's not quite there yet, but he's getting very close. And I don't have any issues really with this version of Jim Lee, who's very young and still kind of figuring out his craft, although he has figured out a whole lot of it. This is one of the difficulties I have with Jim Lee, is that at this point, like, Jim Lee's still learning, and he's still interested in, like, expanding his skills and learning new ways to do things. By the time we get to, you know, like, post Wildcats number 4, Jim Lee's done with that. Jim Lee has learned everything he's interested in learning. He now knows every pose he will ever draw. He knows how to do every background he will ever draw, and he knows every page design he will ever draw. His covers are going to be like one of 10 different variants that are all very well executed, if a little bit unimaginative. You know, that's when I start to lose interest in Jim Lee, because he stops trying to figure new shit out. If he kept going with it and like just kept locking his shit down, kept introducing new styles, like when he started doing the death blow stuff, that was exciting. Because like, oh shit, Jim Lee's gonna learn some new tricks. I don't think he really did. You know, he messed around for 2 issues and a bunch of covers, and then he was kind of done with trying to do that style forever. But like that first Deathblow issue is exciting stuff. There's all sorts of interesting things that Jim Lee is trying in that book. And I feel like that might even be the last time he did that. Anyway, this is like 7 tangents down the line. We're down to like the last 20 people watching this video, so I'm gonna take off. Thanks very much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It helps with all the algorithm stuff. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And if you really want to help out, in the description, there's a link to my Patreon. If you go subscribe there, that'll give you access to everything I do. So all sorts of videos, all sorts of Blood Force comics. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. So yeah, that'll do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.